They/Them is a strange movie. The 2022 drama come horror thriller is one of those rare treats in film because it is both great and awful, with basically no middle ground. The strong elements are rock solid and the weak ones compromise the film completely. It's an odd and quite interesting film to watch, especially having heard such negative things about it because, well, for the first hour or so I was just sitting there thinking, wait, why was everyone complaining about this? Okay, to show you what I mean, let me speedrun the plot for you. We open at nighttime on an axe murder, and the next morning a bunch of queer youth arrive at the camp. Standing opposite them in this hilarious reverse shot are the camp staff. Owen, the camp owner, comes out to greet them, and he is suspiciously friendly and really quite charismatic. He welcomes everyone to the camp and even goes so far as to say that gay people are a-okay by him. He seems very friendly. He tells the group that the boys' cabins are to the right, the girls' cabins to the left, and then we are properly introduced to our delightful Vemby hero Jordan, who just stands there, and that face says it all, doesn't it? Jordan explains their pronouns and being non-binary, and once again Owen is shockingly chill about it. Jordan is invited to try the boys' cabin with the option to work something else out later if it's uncomfortable for them. And after what is a pleasant and seemingly understanding conversation, Jordan parts ways with Owen and heads over to the boys' cabin to settle in. Sometime later, everyone gathers for a kind of group therapy session, where they sit round and talk about why they're at the camp. Some were sent by their parents, some came voluntarily. There's a whole range of reasons that the members of the group give, and the scene also serves to select out who in the group will be our main cast. We don't hear from everyone. Sometime the next day, Owen reveals that one of the girls, Alexandra, is in fact transgender and sends her to the boys' cabin for not being honest about this fact. And here is where the cracks in his facade of niceness begin to show. During scenes of one-on-one therapy sessions that will make your skin crawl, the camp's counselor relentlessly gaslights and undermines the campgoers. And later on, the boys and girls are taken for activities that are supposed to get them in touch with their traditional gender roles. The boys go shooting, the girls go cooking. At shooting, Owen escalates verbal abuse towards Toby, who is, shall we say, one of the less masculine men. It eventually culminates in him attempting to force the poor guy into shooting a sick dog. Jordan intervenes by killing the dog, sparing Toby from having to do so. Jordan, livid, unloads their rifle into the air before storming off. Meanwhile, Sarah, the other camp leader, chastises Veronica for her abysmal pie-making skills, and then tries to seduce Kim, another of the girls at cooking. Alexandra visits Molly, the camp nurse, to get access to her confiscated meds, which turn out to be smuggled-in hormones. Molly is sympathetic and allows Alexandra to take her pills with her. That night there's another murder. The pervy groundskeeper gets their face smashed in through an old CRT monitor. Gabriel and Stu, two of the boys, seemingly fall for each other, but after they sleep together we learn that Stu is in fact a honeypot, a plant by the staff to seduce one of the boys, and that Zane and Sarah are former camp attendees and both clearly still gay and deeply repressed and traumatized about it. The staff abduct Gabriel and torture him with electroshock aversion therapy. Molly, after finding Gabriel unconscious, threatens to go to the police, seemingly finally realizing the horror of what's going on at the camp. But shortly after this, almost all of the camp staff are swiftly killed by the axe murderer, save for Owen, who gets away. The attendees arrange to leave by their own accord, and led by Alexandra, they go in search of help. Jordan, however, stays behind. Molly reveals herself as the killer, and that she killed the real Molly at the start of the film to impersonate her and destroy the camp. Her real name is Angie, and she's a former victim of the camp. She attacks Owen but is unable to kill him until Jordan intervenes. Jordan refuses to kill Owen, but Angie takes the moment of hesitation to attack and kill him. The police arrive shortly after and take Angie away. The following morning, our leads all gather one last time. They discuss their experiences at the camp and finally pledge to each other to live their lives to the fullest of their abilities. And that's it. That's the movie. Camp staff dead, Angie safely in jail, our queer heroes pledged to live their lives to the gayest of their abilities. Now, I don't know about you, but I think this movie ends on kind of a weird note, and I'll get to that shortly, but first, the good. For starters, it's rare for me to like almost every character in something. Usually there's a few that I'm kinda on. I like the people in this film. Actually, I like them a lot. Even the camp staffers, they all act well, are portrayed well. Our gang of would-be queer heroes bring an earnestness to the screen that we don't often see in queer stories. They come with a broad range of experiences and backgrounds that are delivered in the lovely and, at times, heart-rending group therapy session at the start of the film. And as the movie goes on, we get much more from them than just, "My parents made me go here," even from the ones for whom that is literally true. And that some of them were there voluntarily is, I think, important to acknowledge. Kevin Bacon as Owen, the camp owner, is magnetic and exudes charisma, and his initially friendly vibe was the perfect choice to bait audience members who are perhaps a little less familiar with a lot of queer experiences, and to make them wonder, is conversion therapy really that bad? And for those of us in the know, Jordan's suspicion at the outwardly friendly situation at the camp is infinitely relatable. I mean, how many times have you had, say, a family member or maybe someone in the parish try to bait you with a friendly gesture only to know the homophobic onslaught will be along shortly? Finally, and this one might be a little controversial, but I don't think it was a bad idea to have some of the camp staff be former victims of the camp. The two camp staffers, initially revealed to be gay and in truly fantastic denial about it, are understandable. You can look into their eyes and wonder, if I went through conversion therapy, is that how I'd end up? What if I grew up in the worst parts of the South in some backwards-ass rural town? This choice to include those that are so lost that there might actually be no coming back, maybe ever, was initially one that I really liked. The sad fact is there are and have always been queer traitors, people who are so lost that they thought they could get into bed with Nazis and Republicans and all other manner of fundamentalists, Christian nationalists and white supremacists. Those people who thought that they could deny their queerness or at least delude themselves enough to not see what they were really a part of. As to how they got there, I'm sure it's as diverse as anything else in this world. Some, I'm sure, go through the most severe indoctrination by parents, churches, or by conversion camps like the ones in this film. I'm sure many just never find a way to overcome the overwhelming social pressure around them. How they end up that way is immaterial. My point is that in spite of their political leanings or the circles they run in, they're no less queer than any of the rest of us, and that fact is a hard thing to acknowledge and talk about. It's pretty fucking galling to see one of our own running with those groups, acting in support of policies and political movements and organizations that seek to harm or even eradicate us. And of course, some of these groups love to have a token queer. They love having someone to point at and ask, see, why can't you be like that? Why can't you be one of the good ones? Just as the camp staff point to each other and say, I was cured, so you can be too. All the while, the cracks start to show little by little. It's not a bad thing to include, and in their case, the movie does a mostly decent job at casting them in an even-handed light. They're so clearly repressed we can't help but feel a little sorry for them, and yet the film is unwilling to let them off the hook for what they've done, who they've become, and the choices they've made. They still end up murdered along with the rest of the camp staff after all. Where the movie starts to fall short is that their inclusion doesn't really go anywhere or feel like it drives towards a larger point. The portrayal is fairly good, and as I said, I think it's an important aspect to include, but, well, here's the thing. I'm making the effort to interpret this film and to provide a reason as to why. The movie itself doesn't really try to, they're just sort of there. And this issue is only compounded when it comes to talking about the first of my big problems with this movie. The inclusion of Gabriel and Stu's honeypot plotline. This feels like it was really only included as a red herring to throw people off the scent as to who the actual killer is. Story-wise, there's basically no reason they needed to bait the jock with a pretty twink when the camp staff already had a disproportionate amount of power. That boy still would have ended up in his chair getting a healthy dose of Clockwork Orange juice, whether or not this character even existed. This twist is so ineffectual that they kill Stu off not long after this reveal, along with the rest of the camp staff, which is a shame because I liked the character up until that point. Hell, they could have had Zane bait him if they really insisted on having this plotline. He was already established as a repressed gay man, and was attracted to Gabriel anyway. Now, here's where I think it gets really dicey. With Stu thrown into the mix, that means that 3 of the 6 camp staff, our supposed antagonists, are actually queer people. And while, like I said, there are queer traders, it's not a 50-50 split. And it's actually even worse than that, because if you recall, the murderer is the camp counselor, so in actual fact only 2 of our 6 camp staffers are actually straight. This really muddies the framing of conversion therapy as presented by the film, and here's why. Conversion therapy is something that is unilaterally done to queer people by non-queers. It is not an internal issue of the queer community. In a way, the inclusion of Zane and Sarah, but especially of Stu, as gay people, implies we have a strong hand in our own victimization. Making things even worse is that while the reveal that Angie is the killer and a former victim of the camp is a good idea in theory, she is then treated as deeply traumatized and thus also deeply irrational, and that fact is used to condemn the violence she commits as essentially the actions of an insane person. But here's the thing, she's in the right. She is on a mission to close every conversion camp and to kill the staff who work at them. It is unambiguously a good thing to destroy every conversion camp, to fight and kill those who would run them. Remember, these are people who, in this movie, and unfortunately in real life too, will exploit, abuse, and torture children, brutally. She is right to end this practice, and even if that means resorting to violent means. By painting Angie as deeply traumatized and irrational, the film takes away her agency and places her in the same place of moral wrongness as Owen, and paints all violence with the same brush, as something that is unambiguously morally wrong, something no sane person would choose. But violence to hurt, to control, to torture the innocent, to break them and make them conform, is so obviously incomparable to the violence of self-defense, the defense of others, and, even in the worst interpretation of Angie's character, the violence to avenge a personal violation. You just cannot reasonably equate the two sides. Jordan too is, of course, in the right. Their choice to condemn violence and to refuse to kill Owen is hard to argue with, and entirely consistent with their character arc in the film. While they are more hardened than many of their friends at the camp, Jordan is still willing to use violence to protect others, and they fucking hate it, and of course they do. Being forced to defend yourself and those you care about with violence is an awful and traumatizing experience. Jordan is right to disavow it. Where the film falls short is, this isn't always possible. Jordan themselves resorted to necessary violence earlier in the film. The film's conclusion, by framing violence as a wrong choice, where non-violence is always the morally superior option, ignores that in reality they are both powerful tools to protect yourself and the ones you love. The trick is to pick the right tool for the right job. In a hypothetical world where the systems of power exist to protect the rights and interests of queer people, and for that matter any other minority, maybe then you could make an argument for the pacifistic resolution to this film over top of anything else, but then we'd need everyone to fly away aboard the Starship Enterprise. This film, however, is set in the contemporary United States. The systems of power are intensely violent towards queer people, especially trans and non-binary people, and there, as in most, if not all of the world, the police are not our allies. The legislature is not our ally. The system is not our ally. Sometimes we need to defend ourselves with means that lie outside of what that system deems acceptable. And that's okay. In fact, it is necessary. And this is the point that this film lacks the courage to come down on. And I can understand why. To advocate for necessary violence is a hard thing, but it's also important to remember that one of the defining moments of the LGBT rights movement in the 20th century was a riot. And finally, I'd like you to consider that in this film, every survivor of conversion therapy turns out to be evil, or at least so lost and damaged beyond repair that this movie is willing to paint them as violent and irrational. I mean, what the hell kind of a message is that to send to those of us who are so unlucky as to have gone through this process? Survivors of conversion therapy, like all survivors of trauma, are no more lost than any of the rest of us. Yet this movie denies them the catharsis of being seen as anything other than lost, irrational, violent, and criminal. All of this really sucks because this movie was so obviously made with the best of intentions, and that clearly shows in the characterization of every one of the leads. It is deeply empathetic towards the queer experience, and it was obvious that a lot of queer people had input into this film. I would say that I liked this film for upwards of 80% of its runtime, but unfortunately 80% good does not make an 8 out of 10 movie. And it falls apart hard when it wants to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to kill our torturers without saying that queer wrath is justified, and its carelessness with its messaging catches a lot of people in the crossfire. It's a movie that could have been so much more than what it was, with relatively minor alterations. If Angie were painted a little differently, if Stu never turned heel. So little needed changing, but as it stands, this film is so completely compromised that all I can say when I get to the end is, yeah, it's a bad movie. And here's why. Hello everyone, I'm sorry it's been such a long time since the last one of these. I hope you liked the vid and didn't find that any of my takes were too hot. If you did like the vid, then I'd really appreciate it if you consider subscribing to the channel, and if you want to go the extra mile, I do have a Patreon, but please only sign up if you can afford to and want to support me. Either way, if you're just here for the vid or do end up subscribing, I cannot thank you enough for watching all the way through to the end. It really does mean the world to me. Hopefully I'll have another one of these out sometime. But until then, take care, and I hope you have a wonderful day.